Hey, hey. You think you think I could have some of your pellets? You think I could just have some? I finished mine and I don't think we're gonna get fed till maybe three. So
Marty. When they put the
yeah,
pellets in, I said,
yeah.
I'm gonna save my pellets and then I'll have them
Yeah.
later.
Yeah,
And I said,
no.
Marty, you should save some pellets for later.
Yeah, no, I understand that you have some now and I don't. Um, so I was wondering if I could boogie on by. I think if if
Marty,
you're
Marty,
still
Marty, Marty,
keeping them
Marty, Marty, Marty,
underneath
Marty, Marty,
the
Marty, Marty,
palm
Marty, Marty,
tree, I
Marty,
can
Marty.
just grab them.
It feels to me sometimes, and I don't want to say this because I'm not saying you're doing this on purpose, but it sometimes feels
Uh,
like you plan your life expecting me to plan for you.
um, interesting. I mean, I would say I don't really plan my life at all. It's just kind of happens right now. I don't have my pellets, and well, okay. If you really don't want me to have yours, I can go ask Craig and eat some of his. That's fine.
Marty, you can
That's
have the pellet,
well,
but I saved it for now, and now I have to give it away. So that
I'll
means
spot you
next.
back.
Okay, Marty, take the pellet. Take the pellet, Marty. No, 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 no,
Well,
no. Don't look all sad. Take the pellet, Marty,
no,
Marty, Marty.
I feel a little bad about it now.
Marty, take the pellet. Take my pellet, Marty. Don't just lick it. Take it. Take it, Marty.
No, it's fine. I'm full now. I'm full now. You can.
Marty, I know you're not full. I hear that little grumble. Marty, just take the
I
pellet.
swear.
Just take the pellet, Marty. Your stomach has expanded from eating all my pellets, and now it needs to be filled.
Sil, are you gonna be fine? Are you not gonna be hungry? We're not gonna get fed till three.
Here's the thing, Marty. I'm used to it at this point. To be honest, I like that you need me.
I don't bring a lot of pellets over to you, and I drink your water, but I hope I'm bringing you some company.
End it.
End it. Boom, 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 boom. I end it. Boom.
Marty, you are bringing me some company. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. This is episode number 37. I'm one of your hosts, Hal Munger, and joining me now on the line is my dear friend and your other host, Julian Bernardo.
Howdy ho. I hear I've been upgraded to both dear friend and co-host. Now that
I just
is
wanted to make sure you knew that.
awesome. Well,
And also, can I borrow $20?
I'd like to return to the normal friend pool if possible.
All right, you've been rerouted.
We have a fun episode today, don't we?
I think it's going to be fun. It's one of the most important episodes. This one is a little more beginner rather than fundamental, I think.
Yeah.
But it's a heck of a good way to understand things. And honestly, everyone out there in the world is a freaking beginner.
Yeah. No, very literally to parse that, right? Like this one, if you are an experienced improviser in at least some of the Muprov stylings, probably all of this is like, I know this. But yeah, this is kind of the core, and not to overload that term, but like a lot of the meat of what's actually going to be happening on stage. In particular, today we are talking about kind of narrative at the scene level, as well as doing platform for like a longer form narrative.
Mm-hmm. So if you've done improv before, you actually probably have done narrative, even if you haven't done narrative improv. And that's because scenes themselves have a narrative. They have this sort of escalation of energy into some sort of emotional core or giant, energetic burst that then concludes the same way that a show would. And so rather than immediately jumping into show narrative, a lot of times we teach people to understand how the narrative is working at the level of the scene, and then use that as a metaphor to expand out to the show and to have a better understanding of what they're doing at the beginning of the show.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I'll flag that this is like, I feel like this is a stance that we're taking, right? Like Muprov is something that values narrative and, kind of builds towards like doing these narratives. And so we want to be able to frame even the micro, like the fundamental aspects of our improv within these narrative terms. But I think that it is like apt. And like when you hear kind of how we're talking about these things, I think that you will be able to think about all the scenes that you're doing as, little narratives that have their, course that they go through.
Yeah. And that course is really the key, because I've seen a lot of improv that is non-narrative across a whole spectrum of other things. So like I've seen very good dramatic improv that is non-narrative, and very good comedy narrative, like there are lots of things. And I think what makes it feel non-narrative to me is the sense of this kind of arcing out thing. Like even TJ and Dave, who I absolutely love, put on an hour-long show. It's long form, it's deep, but it often to me doesn't feel necessarily like a quote unquote narrative show, or like that they're trying to arc out a narrative. And like 70% of their shows, I feel like they are just, you could cut it off at any moment and it would still work. Whereas some shows, if you cut it off 10, 20 minutes in, you'd be like, wait a second, what happened to me?
Yeah. So to think about the shape of this narrative, if we think about it in like story and narrative terms, like in the most simple way that people sometimes describe stories, right? There's like a, beginning, a middle, and an end. And the way that in like this kind of fundamentals course that we might present this narrative at the scene level is kind of in those terms, or more specifically, like starting from the end, there's this whole end it concept, right?
Yeah. So we were just joking about you can't cut it off at any place. But before teaching that narrative, there's actually an exercise that we like to do that was invented in the first iteration of this workshop by Trey and Cameron, called End It. And basically this gets in the idea of, for a non-narrative scene, how do you find an ending? So if you're just trying to do a scene, how do you literally signal to your partner and the audience that the scene is over?
Yeah. And when you hear this, think back to, improv in general, and, often beginner improvisers, feels like almost always the way that this is like signaled is like, okay, we're going to leave now, or, ending in a very literal sense. And that, that is like a part of what we're talking about here, but we also want to expand our minds and, for the more experienced people, think about ways that we can end without literally just like leaving as characters.
So let's popcorn some back and forth. We don't have show notes on this, so this will be true off the top of the dome. So the first one is I have to go. This is not really a good ending in the sense that it doesn't resolve it stops the scene, similar to like if you just ran across the stage, but it doesn't resolve what's going on in the scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's kind of the most blunt, and like it'll always work. Like if you say I have to go, your scene partner will understand, and everybody on stage will understand it's coming to an end. But yeah, maybe we can think about doing this more nuancedly. So maybe the next level of it could be, I think often there are scenes that are kind of about something, and then like the something happens, so they're waiting for something to get microwaved, or waiting for somebody to come, or for their job interview to start, and like maybe that starts, and like you indicate that this like literal thing is starting now.
There's the bell.
Yeah, exactly. There's the bell. where it's less like non sequitur, I guess, but yeah, is still pretty much like this is the ending within
Yeah.
the logic of the scene.
Uh-huh. I don't have any more literal ones. Do you have any more literal ones like that? Uh, Besides
Uh,
like apology or like the affirmative expression of like, I do love you or something like that.
yeah, and even I would argue that the one that you just said is like maybe even slightly less literal. Like the maybe one final one that happens, I think often in early improv is like someone dies on stage. Yeah, like someone kills someone else on stage. Is often kind of seen as okay, that's the end. But that's the final, and maybe even the most blunt, more blunt than the first one. Way to kind of end a scene.
Okay, so if those are a pool of like literal ones, you can see that none of those are particularly elegant, and they're more of like you're getting to the point where you're like looking at my watch, the scene is going off the
Yeah.
rails. But there's like a concept in I think porting over some stuff from music of uh, oftentimes you can tell that a piece of music is ending because it returns to the tonic chord.
Mm.
So whatever chord you started in that was sort of like overseeing the whole thing, a return to there often can signal the end of a scene. So if at the beginning of the scene or the beginning of a show, you were talking about one specific topic and then you moved away from the topic, the quote unquote coming full circle. If you suddenly are like, oh, this problem that we had throughout the scene, it was like that thing that we mentioned at the beginning of the scene. That is a
Yeah.
super clear way to indicate that the scene is over.
Yeah. 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 Like riffing on this kind of way of ending things, like a more literal way that this happens that I think it feels nice often is starting with kind of like a literal problem or thing that you two are trying to fix of like, oh, I'm literally trying to bake this cake or fix this car or something. And then the bulk of the scene gets into, yeah, the more interpersonal. And then the resolution to the tonic is like bringing back up, oh, okay. Yeah. Now pass me the wrench or something like that.
Yeah. Or now
Uh,
let's fix this car.
yeah. Now let's fix the car.
And crucially, it's not the scene is not ending. Oh, we fixed the car like that is the sort of beginner way to end the scene of the we were building a car versus what you're saying is much more nuanced and um yeah, that's great. There's also another song metaphor one is this idea of the last chord that you hear in a song. Often you're like building and it like really expands and breathes. So a lot of times just by your scene should have a rhythm naturally to it of I'm saying dialogue, you're saying dialogue, blah, 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 blah. One of the clearest ways to indicate to the people around you that a scene is ending is to disrupt that rhythm, either physically by standing up and changing the stage picture, or verbally, audibly, oftentimes taking a literal pause or saying something with finality.
Yes.
Well, can we practice? Let's toss back and forth. You toss me a line, I'll repeat that line, but with finality, and back. We'll go back and forth like 3 times, just so we can feel that audible shift.
Yeah, you're gonna need to deep clean the fryers.
Well, I guess we're gonna need to deep clean those fryers. Yeah. We're out of pesto.
We're out of pesto. I don't know. Not bad.
I feel like that one's more of a gag end line.
Yeah,
we're
out of pesto.
Like Tony, and then cut to roll of like.
Yeah, I'm thinking about trying to phrase it in a scene. Maybe there's like using the framework of put before of if the whole scene was initially about cooking, then big maybe big pause after the emotional part, and then we're out of pesto.
Yeah.
Plain. That's ending the scene.
Awesome. All right, throw it.
I'll throw at you. It's it's gonna look pretty cloudy tomorrow.
It's gonna look pretty. Oh no, I'm gonna try that again. Wait. It it's gonna look pretty cloudy tomorrow. Well, I'm trying one more time. Because what's interesting is that it's a shift. It's actually kind of hard to deliver the finality without the preceding chord of like, oh, we just played a 5
right?
and now we're going to the 1.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a tonic. Yeah.
I think the well is a key thing of like it's gonna look pretty. It's the Midwestern patch your knee and stand up. Well, it's gonna look pretty cloudy tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's gonna look pretty cloudy tomorrow. It's gonna look okay. And exercise.
Yeah, no, but I think that reveals. This is just something we kind of started to do right now, but reveals the mechanic at play, which is. I think you and I often feel very comfortable in a scene delivering that kind of line. Just as in, let's keep on this music metaphor because I like it. Any like jazz improviser probably could take like any point within, their playing and then realize, okay, I know the next 3 things I'm going to do to end it real quick. It's always kind of clear from the context for probably you and I how we would do that. But it is almost always a big function of the context. The other big thing that you flagged is the physical plays a pretty big role. And I think that when I'm thinking about ending scenes, that comes in a big way of the shift in position, getting out of the chair, or striking kind of a dramatic pose and like standing, looking and delivering a line with conviction is often a big way to do it.
Yeah, because swipes are for amateurs. I use them all the time, but in a perfect world, everyone knows that the scene is over at the same time, and you just magically walk off. And one way to achieve that's kind of fun. This is another exercise that's not in the show notes. Is to do scenes and have an audience. And they raise their hands when they think like the show just ended.
Yeah.
And there'll be some moments where like, one person raised their hand, and it helps if the audience can't see the other audience members because they, get awkward about it. But you'll see that there are some times where the audience, 2 or 3 people raise their hands. And then there's sometimes where everybody raises their hand and you're like, okay, I understand now. That moment was clearly a definitive end. Yeah.
Another thing, like a different angle to come at it from, because all of this is like, within the context of the scene, what ends the scene. Often ending a scene, almost always, is leading into another scene. And so this can also happen at different levels of kind of hamminess, but an indication of what comes next is also can be a good way to end a scene. For example, if 2 characters are not going to see another character in this scene, but someone ends with like I wonder if things are better on that side of the wall. Then it's like, oh, we know that there's another character on that side of the wall. That's kind of another inclination to other people that there might be an ending.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I wonder what's going on in the narrative context. That's because that not only ends the scene, but tells you where you're going next.
Yeah. And the continuity can be nice. And more, I think most often that I've seen it, it's not super eloquent. It's like, oh, I wonder what Johnny is doing, or like I wonder, very specifically what it's like at this place in this location. But it's a nice ending in that it gets clear that there's nothing more to be done here, and conveys where the next scene will be.
Yeah, and maybe a last tricky one is like I'm thinking about what you're saying of like a cutaway, but like the cliffhanger thing of like I'm about to kill you, and then and that one you really need a swipe or a light cue, because where the joy of it comes, you still deliver the line differently than you would if you weren't trying to hit a cliffhanger. But it really helps to have that assist, because you don't you don't want to fully change your position and like, resolve everything.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's this is a little bit of a sidebar, but I'm interested. I think this is something that you would want to do, and sometimes I want to do this. But I want to put myself in those situations where either what I'm literally about to do or what I'm about to say, I don't want the audience to see this, but I do want the scene to end. Uh, like is that something that just comes with like ensemble experience, like trying to convey those things? I think there was something like that in my most recent show where I was maybe trying to get in a fight with someone without that fight being seen. But then maybe it just kept going or something. I was like, okay, I'm doing this now.
Yeah, it falls in the category of things I love that are hard to telegraph.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with that. And for any listener who isn't very familiar with improv, when we say swipe, the sort of improv mechanism that people have found for ending scenes off stage is often someone running across the stage with their hand sort of in front of their face, like as if they're bringing a hand across the stage. So it's clear it's not an additional player. And it is, like many things in improv, super clear and pretty inelegant. So finding other ways to do it are often interesting. And I think the best one would be to have everyone have a little light board in their pocket. But
I've also seen out here, seems like the go-to is like, it is a swipe, but just kind of like running on stage with like kind of a lot of momentum where people know that it's time to scatter.
Black.
Yeah, black. It would be fun to do an improv show where swipes are not allowed. And there's a lot of pressure on the limp.
You just have to, when Julian says limp, that's lighting improviser, person who's on the lights doing it. And the main thing is you just need those technical people to get really improv trained in the sense of narrative and just have a very good narrative understanding. And what you need is the improvisers to also be trained in this sort of end it mentality of clearly being able to telegraph via their lines that the scene should end and being aware of how long it's going. But we've been burying the lead on what this end it exercise is. That, and basically the idea is if you're in a non-narrative scene that's sort of stalling and winding and it's going on too long, sometimes you just pull the plug. And that might be, I need to go, or that might be any of these various things. But how this exercise works is you're practicing being able to pull the plug at any point during a scene. So you're doing a scene. At some point, the side coach claps and calls end it. And then you, within the next 4 or 5 lines, find an ending. And it's similar to what Julian said about the music, where, if you were on the 5 chord when the side coach says end it, just hit the 1. But if you need a couple extra chords to get there, you can do a couple lines of dialogue to find the ending.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is just a great thing to practice in general. Being able to end scenes whenever is very helpful. And it's also good in breaking your mental connection of what the scene, what is supposed to happen in the scene from like when the scene can end. Because often like a original or like a new person coming to improv, if the scene is at the auto mechanics, the scene, needs to end when the payment has been made and I get my car. But if you have people in a scene, for example, like on an airplane, right? And you tell them to end it, they are now maybe thinking, okay, like this has to end without like us getting off the plane, or like maybe they flub it and go to the bathroom. But in general, like I think that this exercise is helpful for making that separation clear. That makes sense.
And as you're about to see, there are actually a lot of endings in this exercise. So you can have a side coach of, if your first ending is getting up to go, your second ending has to be something different. But the the next key part of it is that after you say your one or two lines that find ending to the scene, you go back and you continue doing the scene as if that ending had never happened, as if the whole thing was new choiced, and you're just doing a brand new scene. And it's helpful in this exercise to have one fourth person who's not the person calling end it, whose job is just to remember what the last line was before the end it happened, and just feed that line back in, because the improvisers are focused on the scene. The end it caller is focused on calling end it. No one's going to remember exactly what when the call happened. So having that extra line is really crucial.
Yeah.
Sort of like three things in the way of like, you're exhausting pretty quickly into this exercise. You exhaust a lot of the classic endings. And what's nice about it, ending wise, is that also as the exercise goes on, at some point, you're actually going to get to the point in the scene where it probably would have ended for real. And that ended. So it feels like you're improving as the scene goes on naturally.
The final thing I'll say about this whole end it concept that we've been riffing on for a while is just repeating one of my favorite pieces of improv knowledge, mostly just because I think it's like a very evocative metaphor. But I think I heard this from Lisa Rowland. It could be somebody else, Dan Klein or otherwise, but is to always stand in the wings as if you are a sprinter waiting for the gun to start. And the moment you get that feeling that the scene is ending, so anybody on stage does any of the things even close to what we've talked about, you go in and you cut the scene.
Because it really is a moment, if anyone starts to say another line after the telegraphed end line, it's over. There's no longer a point where you can run through and stop that scene without it looking awkward. So, and if the silence is too long, someone will say a line. So
I can't tell you how many times, and this is a failure, but how many times I wanted to end a scene, I saw the moment, hesitated, and then lost it, and that just feels bad.
So get those endings, and then the sort of tricky part of today, or what I think is so great about the ordering, is that we actually are going to be moving backwards. So we start with these scenes that we don't really, like how do you end a scene? And then we go into how do you do the middle of the scene, then how do you do the beginning? And the reason is if you learn how to do the beginning first, it feels really unsatisfying because you do the beginning and then the scene goes wrong and you're like, but if you do it in the other order, then you're like, whoa, my beginning is now actually setting it up so it's easier to end.
The reverse order might feel a little counterintuitive, but it gets to it such that like you're never feeling bad after like a win, basically. So this was the end of the beginning, middle, end that we talk about with respect to a scene. The next thing that we're going to talk about is kind of the middle, kind of the meat. And this is maybe a Hal original.
I think this might be a Hal original. I don't know. It's contested. There was a long thread about who invented this side coach, but it's basically called Find It, where it's similar to what Ness was saying last week about choose to know, choose to feel. It's similar to choose to feel. So before doing Find It, we often will play the game It's Tuesday, which is the side coach, basically the choose to feel side coach of have a big emotional reaction to the last line that was said. But I think with Find It, it doesn't necessarily have to be emotional. It's sort of find what's the heart of the scene. So if this is an interpersonal thing, find the emotional thing. If this is just a goofy goober scene, like find what the bit is and lean into it.
And I think the terminology here is very specific and I think illuminates maybe in one way, in that Find It to me makes me think there is something here, find it. as opposed to manufacture it, come up with it. And often if you are literally doing this find it exercise, like there's some necessary degree of creation that happens, but trying to put people in the mindset of whatever has happened so far can be interesting, I think is big. I think a lot of times that I've spent with early improvisers, they'll like blow through like 16 things that could have been a scene, but just like don't know that any of those things have like the power to do that. So, oh yeah, I went to my brother's house and this happened, and then the two people talk and they go to the ice cream store, and now we're gonna go here and now we're gonna do that. When any of those individual things could have been a scene.
You just gave me an idea for an exercise. What if instead of like, this is the idea is reverse end it. It's kind of like the game Half-Life, where you do a long ass scene that's super winding and shitty. And then you play end it and you end it. And then you are like, the side coach kind of notes a lot of places where it could have ended. And then you kind of redo the, I don't think it works well for end it, but for find it, it actually would work really well. Of like, there are all these things that you kind of miss. And then it's like, all right, back up. Imagine if we had reacted big to this point.
Yeah.
Back up even further. Imagine if we'd reacted big to this.
Yeah.
That could be a really cool way to do this exercise. I don't know. That's never been done, but could be amazing. But yeah, the other thing is I agree with what you're saying of, I actually think It's Tuesday is not the right way to play Find It, because if you're like, pass me the milk, and I'm like, the milk, oh no, if I'm passing you the milk, that must mean that I forgot to go grocery shop. Like, that's not really what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, in the sense that non sequiturs are fun, but there is something that's very delightful about it feeling like it was just created on stage, and not created necessarily in someone's head alone. I like the whole time we're talking about this, I'm just imagining a scene happening like with people in an attic or something, and you're in an attic alone is already like a rich enough scene to do a million scenes in there, basically. If it feels like there's nothing to do, like just pick any detail that's been endowed so far and zone in on that. Yeah. Like, how do you think about making this practically interesting? Like, zoning in on a detail and hammering it out without doing the It's Tuesday thing. Like, let's say we're doing the attic scene, and we're in the attic, and I live in the attic, and I'm showing you things, but it feels like the scene doesn't have legs yet. How would you like kick in and be like, all right, we're gonna find it now?
This is backing up to
yeah.
Again, you get, my personal opinion is kind of similar to yours, is that ideally there already is a thing to find, and that usually what happens is that the people on stage haven't found it. But oftentimes if you say, all right, pause the scene, and especially if you do that at a moment when they're getting distracted, so like once they kind of quote unquote lose it, I say pause, rewind 2 steps back, and I turn to the people who are watching the scene, and I'm like, okay, this motorcycle that I started talking about isn't that important, but backing up, like asking some pointed questions to the people who are watching about what the dynamic is, or what they were interested in the scene. And oftentimes 90% of the audience is in agreement about kind of what that unfound thing is.
Yeah. And so like part of the upshot here is maybe to like take some of those pauses and breaths to allow yourself to like reflect and think back to what's happened so far. Because I think that's amazing terminology as well. Losing it happens a lot when people are going too fast, and have no time to like sit in and actually take in what other people are saying. So yeah.
You don't really lose it unless there's like a tempting other trail to walk down, or like it's often this distraction thing of like, your mother dies in the beginning of the scene, and then suddenly you're getting into an argument over like whether the word tomb is spelled with a B or not, like, and then it's like,
Yeah.
wait, back up. Your mother died.
Yeah. Yeah. And often it also happens in the opposite direction, I feel, where maybe there is kind of a fun dynamic that's starting to arise, but it's about something that feels inconsequential, literally, like arguing over whether tomb has a B. And people feel the need to endow some real things that like carry more interest. And like, I think it's often likely that the scene of two people arguing about spelling is more interesting than the scene of turning that into a scene of, oh, my mother died. Now we have to talk about that.
Yeah, that it's true in reverse. And yeah, I mean, like the elephant in the room is the game thing of like the find the game.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with improv, there's a big school of improv that really teaches that in every scene you should find one quirky little thing and continually escalate it throughout the scene.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily subscribe to that.
Yeah, it's pretty prescriptive. I would say it's like a slightly narrower view of this of finding it. I think find it is a bit more general, whereas I think it's often taught in a bit more of like a cookie cutter TV dinner way of, okay, that's the thing. This is the natural first, second, third escalation. So yeah, our theory subsumes that theory.
Yeah, but sometimes that is the right thing to do. Just like find that sort of thing that's being escalated and play it out. Yeah. So honestly, for this exercise, you can play it like end it, where you pause and go back. But a lot of times, it's actually not as fruitful to play it that way, because there's kind of a quote unquote right answer of, similar to the Tsuji thing that we talked about in narrative. It's like, wait, no, there is an ideal way to arc this out. And then there are like 4 other things that you could do that are a little less ideal, but they're still pretty good. And just do one of them. Don't wait for the ideal thing.
Yeah. And like we said, you could study this whole concept of finding what's interesting in this scene for years and years and years. And so there's no way that just now we're going to be able to kind of exhaustively talk through the ways to kind of find it in a scene. But within the context of this like day of the fundamentals course, this is kind of the middle of the narrative of the scene. And as it's the middle, of course, devote more attention to it as necessary. But within our context, it's just the middle.
Yeah. With all of these things, I think it's good to, you were talking about devoting attention to it as necessary. Like ideally, you're trying to make things feel kind of natural. So you're hoping that with all these exercises that naturally there'll be a couple times where people try it and it doesn't feel very good. And then suddenly someone will have a breakthrough. And then people will kind of model based on that. If it doesn't happen, you need to assist in that in whichever way. Maybe that means jumping in as the coach and trying to demonstrate it, which can go wrong, but can also, be helpful. Or, like really being kind of hands-on and side coaching for a second and being like, okay, pause. Like, here is this, try doing it this way and see if it feels better. But how do you find it if you didn't start it?
Interesting. Yeah. No, there's one more part. The start, the beginning of the story of this narrative. And we've talked about, we've talked about everything. We've talked about zoos, animals, and rabbits, but we've also talked about like platform, which is one thing, but then let's think about the fact that we're zooming in on just one scene and thinking about that scene as a narrative. And starting that scene is its own thing. So in the context of like the fundamentals course, this is a great time to teach things like how to get suggestions, that kind of meta stuff, but also just starting the scene well.
Yeah. So if you think back to what the point of a platform scene is, a lot of it is informational. So this is where, a lot of people get lost in the character objective side or character objective relationship, side uh, of like what is literally going on. Where are you? Can I get this information out as efficiently as possible before getting to the center? But that's not all that's there.
Do you have a specific thing that you're thinking of?
I think that conceptually, some people try to lean really hard onto understanding literally what is happening and assuming that that's going to be a scene of like starting the scene where it's like, okay, everybody, now that the work meeting has commenced, and it's like, well, now you screwed yourself because this whole scene is taking place in a work meeting. You know, sergeants line up. Oh, you didn't do yourself any favors with that opening. So it's not just about the I'm communicating to the people around me what's happening, right?
Yeah. I think let's go back to the music metaphor for a moment. In some sense, this beginning is like the beginning of a set or something when the drummer counts you in, where the beginning of the scene can kind of establish a rhythm of sorts. And I think that rhythm is like a pretty directly translatable, or not directly, but it's a translatable concept here of the scene is interesting not because of the literal details about it. It can often be interesting just because there's a fun dynamic that evolves on stage. And so for this dynamic to evolve, I think the people on stage have to be trying something and also listening hard to each other, if you'd agree with that. And like throwing out kind of things that could turn into a rhythm.
Yeah, like the first blocks, any pattern, like there's a repetition at some point, but the first bit of a pattern can be random. And the first chord of like any piece of music, you can write a piece of music in any key, right? So it doesn't matter what key you choose. If you hit any note, that just tells you a lot about where you're going to go next. But that initial choice is pretty meaningless, which is why improv often starts with suggestion.
Yeah, and it can go in many directions. And to get more literal about kind of what we mean by this, let's say I come on stage and I say, the oranges, I think they'll be fresh this season. The person who comes on next, there's obviously infinite moves, but one like quick thing, just like how we talk about like a key, one quick thing that you might want to identify as an improviser is my character kind of on the same team as this other character? Like, are we working toward a common goal or are we working toward opposite goals? And so, maybe within the first 10 seconds, if you're an experienced musician, you can identify what the key is. If you are an experienced improviser, you can maybe tell really quickly what the shape of the relationship is going to be. And if we're thinking, and we shouldn't get lost in the sauce of this music metaphor, but like the stuff that we talked about before of like core or crew or crow or however you want to talk about it, those are the things in a scene, or at least like one way to kind of summarize those things. And so in terms of establishing this beginning, you can take like whatever the first line is, the first offer that's given to you, and turn it into one of those things. You could say, oh, the oranges are in season. Okay, that gives me the hit. What I'm going to do is establish the where. I'm going to accept that we're in an orchard right now. Or you can use it to go into a relationship, like I said, or emotion, or you could have like a strange reaction to it that begets a lot about your character.
Mm-hmm. You could do a want of if you're the rival, like I'm going to crush your oranges, or and in spring that means that you might find love or whatever.
Yeah. Where it's like, there's the thing about like it's not the first person to start a revolution. It's like the second person. I know I'm butchering it, but how the second like kind of offer relates to the first is honestly often more defining than what the first offer is. Unless, I mean, obviously you can come in with the thing like we talked about of we are in the military, and this is a drill sergeant scene.
God, I love started exercise. Or like, I love spontaneous exercises, but you could do a pretty mean exercise where one person comes out and delivers a line, and then you all take turns rotating through delivering second lines to it.
Yeah.
That could be a fun exercise to try to see all. And again, it's a divergence test, so you're trying to see the different ways, and a helpful side coach would be to point out to people how they're similar. So if someone's just being different by being crazy wacky, you're like, okay, boom, any other crazy wacky one we've already done.
Yeah.
Now how can you isolate different parts of from a scene? What about just like, how do you generate randomness into your openings
Yeah.
and spontaneity?
Right. So just, the beauty of the fact that the beginning doesn't matter is that it can be anything. It can be literally random. And something that I often do, because it's like, for me, it's just very easy to do, is to just go on stage and strike a pose. It doesn't need to be like a crazy pose, like I'm doing the splits, or like a real pose that denotes anything, but just adopt a physicality, see how my partner responds to it, and sort of converge on some sort of truth. I like that because it does feel random. Like, I'm sure there's like patterns to it, but when I do that, I'm not like trying to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so that feels like it's coming up with something entirely new for my partner to play with.
Mm-hmm. My high school improv teacher had this concept of strings that he really liked. Oftentimes as a suggestion for the scene rather than a word, he'd be like, string pulling upwards on your head, and you picture kind of an invisible string and you get a little taller, and then he'd be like, string pulling outwards on your right knee, and you kind of buckle a little bit that way, and it would just put you in a, rather than a pose, just a slightly different way of carrying yourself than you normally do, and like everything would come from there. We have the word association poppers, so like if the last scene was about fish, or if the last thing that someone said before the scene started was fish, you could be like, fish, and then you associate that to water, and then you associate water to fire or something like that, and now you've gotten fire from fish, which is totally different, so it'll seem like a just totally spontaneous thing.
Yeah. The other source of spontaneity or adding things in these scenes are, I love to be specific, pepper details into the dialogue, and like often none of these have any like inherent meaning later on, or baked into it rather, but they can turn into something later on. I might mention some other character that exists in this world. I really like having kind of vague statements, and I know that it's like a tightrope to walk in improv, but something that can be interpreted as many things, like, oh, I think they're going to come around on it. Right. Like that doesn't mean anything yet, but you can turn that into many things.
I really like that kind of thing, because then the choice that you're making is the way that you phrase it. I think they're going to come around on it. I agree. We totally don't know what that is yet, but that telegraphs to your partner that the thing you're communicating is the relationship. And like we could go back and forth on all the different ways you could say,
yeah,
I think they're going to come around on it, versus I think they're going to come around on it. Just the difference between those two things tells me a lot about how Julian and I are friends, and
totally
our emotions.
And like, I think it's almost nice in the sense of you probably should at some point, just as people would, make more specific reference to what the it is, who they are. But teaching stuff like this tells people that maybe the interesting thing is not necessarily about knowing the details. Because you can, if people are like both like very hot and on, and, I say like, I think they're going to come around on it. And my partner responds with like a big reaction or something that energizes me, and we go back and forth. It just kind of in the energy space, like reacting to one another. The thing that it's about never necessarily needs to get stated. It's just what spawns of that kind of random seed is helpful.
I just what you're saying was of the energy and the sort of the spawning was reminding me. I in my own personal improv journey. I'm doing some duo prov right now with someone, and we were working with someone who was coaching us to start our scenes before we were on stage. Which is kind of a crazy concept. She said that she had seen a Texas group called like something Southern Women or something like that, where both there's two guys who were playing their moms, and they would start a conversation backstage, and whenever they were like next up, blah blah blah, they would just walk in already having the conversation. So we were doing a ton of scenes where we would start a scene backstage and then walk on whenever they called us out. And it's a really good fundamental demonstrating for beginners, I think, because if you have a room where you can do that, the start will just be more dynamic and interesting if the scene's already going. And the people will be able to see that, and then learning how to replicate that without the parallel entryway of like, how do I start right in the middle with the energy of a scene without worrying about, hi, nice to meet you, or all that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's starting in the middle is an often repeated adage that I think is super helpful, and just makes it feel real and gives it some of that energy and dynamicism, whatever.
And then I don't know if you do this. I pump up the jams or whatever, where you physically increase your blood flow and your emotional state before getting on stage. And like, if you can, be like, all right, the scene's about to start. I'm going to tense my fist. I'm going to walk around. I'm going to change my posture and get into some sort of worked up emotional state, or calm down, or sad, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think I do as much of the physical. But one thing when I'm about to do on stage, I feel like when I'm off stage, I am like so in my head. I'm just thinking about what is happening in the show, who are the characters, what should happen next, what is the right, blah, 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 blah. All of this stuff is going a million miles an hour in my head. And what I like to do is just throw it all out. Don't think about that. Don't think about anything.
Let it go.
So yeah, my preparation is, I guess, a little more mental, but it's the same kind of thing of trying to put myself in the state where I can exist on stage.
All right. Well, those are a bunch of different ways that you can start it. And the key to having these three side coaches is that once you kind of go through them all in detail and pause, rewind, eventually you can have it so the side coach goes, start it. A scene starts, partway through they go, find it. And then partway through they go, end it. And ideally these happen the same way that you don't really want someone to run through and swipe your scene. Ideally, you're actually cueing like the ideal moment for the side coach to say find it, the ideal moment for the like ideally it all is sort of happening organically. And then sometimes you're coming in as a reminder, because a lot of inexperienced improvisers are actually just like one side coach away from doing phenomenal scenes. Like they have all the good tools. They just are going to get lost one or two times, and they need one person to pop in and remind them.
Yeah. It's the training wheels concept. If you practice this where you're kind of being told to do it in very regimented ways, first individually doing these end it, find it, start it separately, then you can work up to being told this in a scene, and then eventually you'll be able to do it without any sort of side coaching.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I don't know, this is another question. Do you ever do this to yourself in your brain of just be like, end it, and then just like jump forward or
totally 100%. Both of those happen a lot. I think it's interesting because the thing that you the sign in the scene that I should end it right now is different from it is like the sign that indicates that it is being ended, because often I'm the one who is ending it. And that's like a kind of thing of like, oh, I think that this scene has run its course, but there's not like a grapple to end it yet. So I am going to become that grapple. And that is like, yeah, that's a hard thing where this distinction lies clear in my mind that like visually when it would be good to end the scene or hearing when it would be good to end the scene is a bit different from the like kind of idea of when the scene should end, right?
Yes,
Like
I
I'm
agree. Yeah.
yeah, like yeah, so getting to the point where you know how to call end it on yourself is I think maybe even another level of like figuring
Mhm.
out the rhythm of these things. But I guess you probably do it if it gets called on you a bunch.
And
And that is the
maybe
way
an
to build
easier
it.
one is knowing when to call start it on yourself. There's a lot of times where everyone's hanging back for
Yeah.
whatever reason, and it's like somebody just needs to get out there
Hmm.
and learning how to move your body before you have an idea in your brain is an important skill that these things train. I wish like when you're learning to drive and there's a second brake in the car,
Hmm.
it would be cool to have a light board that was that way.
Yeah.
In high school, we used to always have two directors. Um, that way, if anyone thought the scene should end, there were two people on the lights who could cut the show. And I think it would be really useful to learn like sort of training wheels version where you hit your light board and it doesn't actually do anything, but you're trying to make it maximize the number of times that your light board matches up with the pro's light board or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, we should end this soon, but I got to share a way in which thinking a lot about this stuff has poisoned me, and I'm thinking about something that happened yesterday, which was I've become so accustomed to ways to like be very clear about signaling like it's time to end this scene. And yesterday I was thinking about I was hanging out with two good friends I have out here. And we were at like this outdoors like beer garden, and there were moments where I could feel it. I felt the like end it in me, like, oh, this is a good time. And I was like, yeah, let me just like think about what I would do. And I've thought hard about this now. Like you mentioned this literally. I forget if it was while we're recording or not, but like the like slap your knee, like
Well,
yeah, all right, yeah, well, and like just all of like think about that because that's to me like the same thing, the same neuron that's firing. Think about how you do that in the real world because I'm sure you have experience as a person non-verbally or verbally like indicating an ending, like grabbing your backpack, right? All this. I was thinking so hard about that last night, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna clap my hands like this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this, and that's gonna indicate that it should end, and it does, and people realize that.
I'm so bad at that in real life. It's painful. Julian's laughing because he's tried to kick me out of places. But yeah, there's off the court improv and the doing things off the court that help with improv on the court, but there's also off the court improv of using your improv skills in the wild.
Yeah.
And I will never be good at that. Like, no matter how much I can listen in a scene, it won't make me a better listener in real life. And no matter how much I try to end it in a show, it won't make me want to leave a social gathering.
Yeah.
Someday we can all
Someday.
aspire.
We all may.
We may all. No, it's not that. That's not how. How would you say we may all aspire?
Someday, we may all aspire.
This has been Muprov.
Musings. So, my sign off is after a grueling, well, not grueling, but fortuitous, violent, everything mishmash of reality, I'm getting very close to ending my first year of grad school. There's only a few more weeks left until everything is wrapped up. I can count the assignments I have left on one finger. It's 3. And yeah, I'm ending the first year of grad school, and I've been thinking since the ending is coming soon, just like wow, this has been interesting. I'm new to living in this new location. I'm hanging out with people that I didn't know less than a year ago, and yeah, it's ending.
end it. What are you gonna? How are you gonna end it? Like, are you gonna try to punctuate that ending, or are you just gonna Irish
Ooh.
goodbye?
Interesting. I always like to punctuate. I do have a show, an improv show, the day before I fly back. So that will punctuate it to some degree. And with school, there is that natural punctuation, right? Of like finals. So I have finals, and that's like the final thing that's happening before I go back. Uh, so yeah, I guess that will be the big punctuation that happens.
You're just finding it. You don't even need to manufacture something because thing is everything actually ends.
Everything actually ends. Yeah. Nothing is veritably forever.
Even
I feel,
this.
and that's the moment, right? That's the moment where there was a silence, and Hal came in with the starting to swipe, like walking. And then I came in with the line of dialogue, and now Hal is like, oh, okay, I'm not far enough on stage where people see that I'm swiping the scene. So I can recess back
I
as
blame
Julian.
Zoom.
Yeah, yeah. You can blame Zoom. You can blame weird theaters. You can blame anything. But when it comes down to it, the fault is on all of us.
This has been
To
a do
take
as I
that,
don't do.
do as I don't do as I say to do. And another a forbidden source of improv is the aggro improv, which is I saw Hal starting to end this, so I'm gonna cut Hal off as I did and end it myself because this is my final year of grad school. I get to end it however I want, and I get to end one of the trinultimate or whatever episodes of Muprov Musings before I finish my first year of grad school on my own. So thank you for listening to my diatribe upon this earth. Goodbye. Gibbly boop 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 boop. Skibbly boop boop boop. It's just hard because I don't even know the medium of how this ends. This could be still going.
Oh, it definitely is. Again, the medium of Muprov Musings is that there are two endings, and one of them happens when there's a good moment for the song to start kicking in, and the other one is like, okay, no one's listening anymore. But for the no one's listening anymore, this part, I forgot. I feel like there's this whole idea of key changes in music and bridges, and that's really crucial in a lot of things.
Totally.
In a scene, that an emotional key change is a really effective way of like,
Yeah.
and it's not something you want to do too early on in a scene, actually.
Totally.
You want to be like emotional track, emotional track, emotional track, emotional key change, and then oftentimes return to the original beat, or some new third ending or whatever. But
Yeah. Bringing in this music metaphor that we're using, like I've been thinking along these lines recently, and been thinking about like how useful it is to view like the prov through this like tension and release kind of mindset that it seems like all of the like tonic dominant stuff is about. And certainly often, I think that like the operative way to apply it, right, is like the things that are tense or like dominant in the key getting real. The subdominant that leads into the dominant is like asking questions, like in like a very metaphorical sense, right, of like creating things that the audience wants to know. So endowing a cabinet that can be opened, and then the dominant is opening it, and then the tonic is however that related to the rest of it, right?
You went too deep for me.
Oh, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Like you did back then. Can't you see me now? I remember Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now?